Egyptians' most famous authors and their contributions. So the first one we have is Naguib Mahfouz. Naguib Mahfouz is the only Arab writer to win a Nobel Prize for literature. He is considered to be one of the first contemporary writers of Arabic literature to work on the concept of existentialism. He was born in a conservative religious family on December 11, 1911 in Gamaleya quarters of Cairo and died on August 3, 2006. So during this long illustrious career, he published 34 novels, over 350 short stories, 5 plays, and dozens of movie scripts. His childhood visits to museums made history a major part of his theme in his book. Year later, he launched his writing career and worked as a journalist at El Risala and also wrote for El Hilal and Al Haram. Salama Samusa, an intellectual and who had a big influence on his thoughts on science and socialism. Second is Tawfiq al-Hakim. Tawfiq al-Hakim was the founder and pioneer of Arabic novel and drama and a leading personality in modern Arabic literature. He was born in Alexandria on October 9, 1888 and died on July 26, 1987. He rose to fame with his work Al-Akaf, which is The People of the Cave in 1933. It was a study of the human struggle based on the story of 7 sleepers. He was respected and loved for his contribution to Arabic literature through his drama, and his prose was intermixed with colloquial Arabic. So, Yawmiyat Naifi Ar-Yafa, The Maze of Justice, 1957, is a high quality in pun and satire on Egyptian official doom. Lid El Nama or Soft Hands introduced him as a playwright to talk of contemporary interests. So he wrote over 400 plays. He is also recognized as a pioneer in Arabic literature. His works are a masterpiece in style which combines symbolism, reality, and imagination. His selection of setting, dialogue, and narration are very highly appreciated. He was never afraid to experiment with different levels of dramatic language. Next we have is Yusuf Idris. So by birth, Yusuf Idris was an Egyptian and like many progressive and revolutionaries breathed his last in Europe. He was a playwright and a novelist. His stories pivoted around ordinary villagers and were very close to reality. He reached fame by breaking away from traditional ways of writing with his unique style of combining colloquial dialect with conventional Arabic literature. He was a practicing doctor when he took to writing. Arkhas Layali, or The Cheapest Night, was his first collection of stories that was published and sold in 1954. Further volumes followed in 3 years' time, in which Alaysa Khadlik Isn't Thou So was very popular. His style and expression changed in the 60s. He created a unique Egyptian dramatic form, mixing colloquial language with conventional classical. He also wrote the plays Al-Lazat Al-Haraya, The Critical Moment, Al-Farafir, the 4/4 or the Flip-Flop, and Al-Makatatin, The Strip Ones. Next is Ihsan Abdul Qudus. Ihsan Abdul Qudus was born on January 11, 1919 and died on January 12, 1990. He was an Egyptian writer, novelist, and journalist. He started writing short stories and classical poems at a very tender age of 11. He was imprisoned for opposing the government and exposing the government's role in providing the troops with defective arms in the Palestinian War. His second jail term was also for exposing the government's machinations through his article Al-Jamaya al-Sirriya allati Tatum Misr. A conservative, yet he focused on the misery and sacrifice of the Egyptian woman. He wrote more than 60 novels and collection of short stories. He tried to reform the Egyptian society through his writings. So many of his novels were dramatized, used as a radio series, scripts, televisions, miniseries adaptations, and film adaptations. His fame crossed international borders, and his works were translated in several foreign languages like English, German, French, Ukraine, and Chinese. His most famous works include My Blood, My Tears, My Smile, which got him the first award for novel writing. 2 years later, he received the Best Screenplay Award for his novel, The Bullet is Still in My Pocket. So Taha Hussein is said to be one of the most influential 20th century Egyptian writers and intellectuals, being awarded the nickname Dean of Arabic Literature. Hussein was deemed a figurehead for the Arabic Renaissance in literature and contributed hugely to the modernist movement in the Arab world. Hussein studied in the College of Arts, focusing on religion and Arabic literature at Al-Azhar University. He went through most of his life without his sight, the tragic result of a procedure performed by an unskilled practitioner. In spite of this, he maintained his ambitions as a writer, producing works such as Wednesday Talk, A Man of Letters, and The Call of the Curlew. Lastly, we have Yahya Haki, an Egyptian writer and novelist born in a middle-class family in Cairo. Haki trained originally as a lawyer at the Cairo School of Law. Like many other Egyptian writers, he spent the majority of his life working as a civil servant. This worked as a supplement to a somewhat mediocre literary income. Haki eventually succeeded in becoming advisor to the National Library of Egypt. Coming late to a literary career, Haki was an editor of the literary magazine Al-Majalla from 1961 to 1971. He published a number of collections of short stories, one novel, Hashim's Lamp, and numerous articles. The titles include The Mother of the Helpless, The Dawn of the Egyptian Novel, and Antar and Juliet. Next we have is the types of Egyptian literature. So in ancient Egyptian comprised wide array of narrative and poetic forms, including inscriptions on tombs, stele, obelisks, and temples, myths, stories, and legends, religious writings, philosophical works, wisdom literature, autobiographies, biography, histories, poetry, hymns, personal essays, letters, and court records. So, literature in the Old Kingdom. The offering lists and autobiographies, though not considered literature, are the first examples of the Egyptian writing system in action. So the offering list was a simple instruction known to the Egyptians as the Hetep Dinisu, a boon given by the king, inscribed on a tomb detailing food, drink, and other offerings appropriate for the person buried there. The autobiography, written after the person's death, was always inscribed in the first person as though the deceased were speaking. So the catalogue of virtues accentuated the good a person had done in his or her life and how worthy they were of remembrance. Littim notes that the importance of the virtues was that they reflected as the ethical standards of society, while at the same time making clear that the deceased had adhered to those standards. Some of these autobiographies and lists of virtues were brief, inscribed on a false door or around the lintels. Others such as well known. Autobiography of Wendy were inscribed on large monolithic slabs and were quite detailed. The autobiography was written in prose, the catalogue in formulaic poetry. So these autobiographies and virtue lists gave rise to the pyramid texts of the 5th and 6th dynasties, which were reserved for royalty and told the story of a king's life, his virtues, his journey to the afterlife, They therefore tried to encompass the earthly life of the deceased and his immortal journey on into the land of the gods, and in doing so, recorded early religious beliefs. So the creation myths, such as the famous story of Atum standing on the primordial mode amidst the swirling waters of chaos, weaving creation from nothing, came from the pyramid text. A body of literature known as the Instructions in Wisdom appeared. So these works offer short maxims on how to live, much along the lines of the biblical book of Proverbs, and in many instances anticipate the same kinds of advice one finds in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms, and other biblical narratives. So wisdom literature, the pyramid text, and the autobiographical inscriptions developed significantly during the Old Kingdom and became the foundation for the literature of the Middle Kingdom. Next we have is in the Middle Kingdom literature. So in the Middle Kingdom is considered the classical age of Egyptian literature. During this time, the script known as the Middle Egyptian was created, considered the highest form of hieroglyphics and one of the most often seen on monuments and other artifacts in museums in the present day. The pessimistic literature is some of the greatest work of the Middle Kingdom, that it does not only expresses a depth of understanding of the complexities of life, but does so in high prose. Some of the best-known works of this genre, generally known as didactic literature because it teaches some lesson, are The Dispute Between a Man and His Ba, The Illiterate Peasant, The Satire of the Trades, The Instruction of King Amenemhet I for his son Senusret, The Prophecies of Neferti, and the Admonitions of Epoer. So the dispute between a man and his ba is considered the oldest text on suicide in the world. The piece presents a conversation between a narrator and his soul on the difficulties of life and how one is supposed to live in it. The Middle Kingdom also produced the poetry known as the Lay of the Harper, or also known as the Songs of the Harper, which frequently questioned the existence of an ideal afterlife and the mercy of the gods, and at the same time created hymns to those gods affirming such as an afterlife. The most famous prose narratives in Egyptian history is the tale of the shipwrecked sailor and the story of Sinuhe. Both came from the Middle Kingdom as well. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor holds Egypt as the best of all possible worlds through the narrative of a man shipwrecked on an island and offered all manner of wealth and happiness. He refuses, however, because he knows that all he wants is to be back in Egypt. Sinuhe's story Sinuhe's story reflects the same idea as a man is driven into exile following the assassination of Amenemhat I and longs to return home. The literature of the Middle Kingdom opened wide the range of expression by enlarging the subjects one could write about, and this would not have been possible without the first intermediate period. Next we have is in the literature in the New Kingdom. The inscriptions are religious in nature, and it focuses on the gods, usually either on Ammon or Osiris and Isis, the gods of the two most popular religious cults of that time. So the stories and poems, however, continued to deal for the most part with the conflicts people face in their lives, such as dealing with injustice, an unfaithful spouse, and trying to live one's life fully in the face of death. So these are the same themes that have been touched on or fully dealt with during the Middle Kingdom. But the New Kingdom texts show an awareness of other cultures, other values outside of the Egyptian paradigm. An interesting aspect of a New Kingdom literature is it emphasized on the importance of the scribal tradition. Scribes had always been considered an important aspect of Egyptian daily life. In the New Kingdom, however, in the works extant in the Papyrus Lansing and the Papyrus Chester Beatty, a scribe is not simply a respected profession, but one who is almost godlike in the ability to express concept in words, to create something out of nothing, and so become immortal through their work. So during the New Kingdom, these works were largely hymns, prayers, instructions in wisdom, praise songs, love poems, and stories. So probably the best known piece of literature from New Kingdom texts is the Book of Coming Forth by Day, commonly known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Although the concepts and spells in the Egyptian Book of the Dead originated in the early dynastic period and the book took form in the Middle Kingdom, it became extremely popular in the New Kingdom and one of the best preserved texts we have of the work date up to the time.